I'm going to start with my heritage. My great-grandfather and grandmother, James Killpack and Selena, were born in England and sailed from Liverpool to New Orleans on the international cruise. It was a 10-week voyage from Liverpool to New Orleans, and then they went up to Mississippi to Keokuk, and after finding out that Joseph had been killed, they headed west on into Utah, which was another 11 weeks trip across the plains to get there. My great-great-grandfather started farming out in Utah, but wasn't very successful because grasshoppers destroyed his crop the first year. He then got into government services, surveying out in that area. John, his son, and I think James became very disgusted with the practices and the teaching of the Mormon faith. And they felt after several years they left in the middle of the night, worried that the Danites would kill them to save their lives, known as blood atonement back then. They ended up settling back in Council Bluffs, and where my great-grandfather John James and my grandfather Ernest Killpack were born. One of the interesting things with John's family, 3 of the children, I got a picture here Marion's going to pass around, 3 of the children married 3 of the Carlisles. So they were had a lot of triple-related family members. The Carlisles joined the church after they were introduced to the Book of Mormon by 2 missionaries who came to the area. Another one of the Carlisle children came to Ramona and taught music at Graceland. Her name was Mabel Carlisle Hyde. She was also married to one of the co-founders of the Hy-Vee food store chain. My grandfather Ernest, I don't know if you want to get that so they can see it on the screen or not, but anyway, Ernest married Ellen Carlisle, my grandmother. His brother, Walter, attended Graceland with L.D. Weldon back in the day.
Thank you.
My maternal grandparents, Nettie Macklin, also came from England, and her family settled in western Iowa. The family attended church in the Missouri Valley area. Nettie attended Graceland in 1898 along with her brother William. After Graceland, Nettie taught school for 9 years, and then before marrying Peter Jason, and they raised 10 children together. That was her and then the family. First picture is Nettie Macklin and Peter Jason, and the second picture is the 10 children. So whenever we had family reunions, it was a large group. Same way with the Carlisles, with the triple marriage. Whenever we got together for family reunions, sometimes we had 300 people, kind of like the Stevenson family. And they were large group gatherings. Nettie was the only one in the family besides my mother who stayed with the faith. Peter was not a member of the church. I still have my grandmother Nettie Macklin's Doctrine and Covenants when she was at Graceland. I think it was originated in 1897, was published in 1900. I'll pass that around just in case anybody is interested in that. My parents, my father Vincent Killpack married Emily Jason in 1940. They built a small house near Beavertown, Iowa. One of the pictures up in the front of the room here is where I grew up and my family lived all of their life, my parents. You you can't see the orchard. We had a big orchard behind the house that's, in that picture shows a bean field, but we lived off the land basically. We had a fruit orchard where we had crab apple trees, so we'd have 75 jars of crab apple juice, apple butter. We had apple trees, yellow delicious, red delicious. We froze a lot of apples and for canning and stuff. We had cherry. We'd go up to my grandparents and pick cherries, and we'd have 60 or 70 quarts of cherries down in the cellar. And as you can see in that picture, you can see a driveway. It was 1/10 of a mile long, and we would plant 8 rows of potatoes the length of that driveway. And we'd have a wagon load of potatoes to put in the cellar to last us through the winter. If we got store-bought bread, it was a special treat. Mom made all of our bread and stuff. I came from a family of 6. My oldest, Lee, married Carl McGuire's sister, Karen. Janice, my next oldest, married Jack Mann, who was from the Moorhead, Iowa. Lived most of their years up in Emmitsburg, Iowa, before settling in Mission, Texas in the retirement years. My brother Ken married Mary Baker from Omaha, Nebraska. My sister Kathy married Ken Elthorpe from Missouri Valley, and then later married Max Matthews in Mission, Texas. My youngest, then I was before Kathy, but and of course I married Marion here. We got a picture of the early years. My youngest sister, Carol, married Steve Brandon from the Missouri Valley area. All of my family stayed with the church, except my oldest brother, Lee, who was a high priest, and he ended up in the remnant church as an apostle. I was baptized when I was 8. When the church doors were open, we were there. Usually first one there, last one to leave. As a child growing up, I was very shy. I always hid in the background. I still like to hide in the background. I didn't enjoy school because I was a slow learner. I was slow reading. I had poor phonics skills, so school was tough for me. I attended Beebytown Elementary School from kindergarten through 8th grade, and then went to Tri-Center in high school, which was a consolidation of schools, Neola, Persia, Minden, and Beebytown. I love sports. I played football, basketball, track. I really wanted to be a wrestler, but my parents were tired of driving us to all these sporting events, so I had to play basketball along with my older brother. My senior year, I qualified for the shot put and placed 2nd in the state of Iowa. And at that meet, I was so scared that I actually ended up throwing the shot put 2 foot farther than I had ever thrown it in my life. One of my mentors as a child growing up was Lois Powell, Raymond's mother. She was a kindergarten teacher and taught my Sunday school class for a number of years. And she helped mentor me, was one that took me out of some of my shyness, got me involved in more things. Every summer I went to reunions, church camps, Woodbine, then Guthrie Grove when it opened. I served as camp counselors in Guthrie Grove, in Nauvoo, at Stewartsville. Also was able to go on three caravans with the youth to do historical track of the church, where before we went, we would have a session on the various places that we were going to stop and what they were going to see, so that they had an idea of the history of that caravan. And I enjoyed those. Every summer, I went to reunion. I graduated from high school in 1966 and was offered a football and track scholarship to Wayne State University in Wayne, Nebraska. But that summer I was working bridge construction to earn money to go to school. And as we were finishing the bridge deck and paving it, we needed to move an electric generator. And there was only 3 of us in that area at the time. And I told the other 2 if they could lift one end, I would lift the other. And as I grabbed a hold of the generator, I quickly found out that it was not grounded. And here I was, paralyzed to that electric generator. The 2 guys that were there to help me didn't know what to do without getting themselves in the same predicament. Luckily, my foreman saw what was going on and was able to get to an area where he could shut it off. I had passed out by that time, and as they got me up, I was unable to stand on my own. My brother, who was also working bridge construction that day, took me in his G2 on a very fast ride to the hospital. I spent a day or 2 in the hospital, and they ended up having to shock me back, my heart back into rhythm. Wow. I actually ended up going back to work in bridge construction for a few weeks before one of the surveyors that worked on the interstate asked me to join his survey crew. While I was in the hospital during that time, I decided that maybe Wayne State wasn't the place that I should be, and I really wanted to go to Graceland. So I sat out that semester and worked survey crew. We worked on Interstate 80 and Interstate 29 as it passed in between Council Bluffs and Omaha. So I'd walk these 6-inch beams and give readings to the survey chief, and that was always interesting. Bridge construction was a very dangerous job. Whenever it rained, we would head into Beavertown and they would sit at a bar until it stopped raining. So some of them had a few drinks before we come back. I remember one day when we were working bridge construction, somebody had forgotten to tighten some of the bolts on the deck, and the individual fell 65 feet down into the Potato Creek, which wasn't very deep. It was probably 3 or 4 feet deep. There was just a lot of things why I worked bridge construction that I thought was unsafe. One day they had me, as we were finishing the bridge construction, they had me on the end of a crane boom, and they had a 4x10, it was 4 inches thick and 10 feet long, and they had it tied on to the end of the crane, and I was stripping the underside of the deck, standing on the end of the thing. It was kind of like being on a diving board. When I pried the plywood off underneath the bridge construction, that it would kind of bounce. So there was a lot of dangerous things, and that's why I ended up going to the survey crew, because I didn't like how dangerous it was working there. After I got released from the hospital, like I said, I worked the survey crew. And then in the fall of the spring semester of '67, I attended Graceland. LD Weldon found out that I was a shot putter, so I ended up being in track, and I also played football at Graceland. I was an outside linebacker, loved the sport. We didn't win many games, which was kind of strange for me, because all the way through high school, we were on a winning team, but at Graceland, I think in my 3 years, we might have won maybe 5 games. Also, did track at Graceland with Bruce Jenner. Bruce and I were javelin throwers. I was a shot putter along with that, and discus thrower. I actually ended up winning an intramural wrestling tournament at Graceland, and so Jerry recruited me to go to participate in wrestling at Graceland. So I was a 190-pound wrestler. I loved Graceland, everything about it. I chose accounting as my major, but later changed it to health and recreation. I particularly enjoyed the church service. The MSC would be full of students. You know, back then we had a large enrollment, and so the MSC would be full. I also enjoyed morning devotions that we'd have with Zinzer and Jacobson and others. I worked in the Commons for a work assignment. I did 14-hour work assignment in the kitchen. I would get up at 5:30 in the morning. I was a kitchen cook assistant. So my 14 hours went pretty fast. I only had to work about 3 mornings to complete my work assignment. After my first semester, several of my friends decided that we could go to Alaska and work on an oil rig and make big bucks. So we all three of us got our finals taken a day or two early so that we could make the trip to Alaska. But our trip to Alaska it rained on us most of the way up there. So we got there a day late and $1 too short. The rig had taken off with our contact, so we ended up staying in Alaska for a week or two, seeing if we could find something else. If we'd stayed a week longer, we would have been there during one of the big fires and might have been able to work in that situation. I ended up returning back to Council Bluffs or Beavytown, my home, and ended up finding a job working in a packing house. I was trying to get a position where lugging beef, but they thought I was too small. So I ended up having a position where I skinned 1,000 cow livers a day.
Oh my.
Which was not very much fun. So you'd lay this liver on there, you'd flip it. And the person that I trained was very uncareful. And I told the supervisor he shouldn't be in that job. He ended up skinning the back of his hand because he just wasn't careful. Also, while working at the packing house that summer, when the livestock come through, they shock me or put a bullet in their head. And on one occasion, one got stunned and got loose in the packing house and got outside. Knowing that I was an avid hunter growing up, they turned me and another person loose with a rifle and told to bring this cow back in the middle of Omaha. Well, on the outskirts of Omaha. We actually got the job done and got the beef back to the packing house. Through a mutual friend at Graceland, I met Marion, my one and only true love.
Why is that funny?
I asked her to marry me a couple times, and I got turned down. We had many adventures while we were dating at Graceland. One of them was we had a class, or our house had a steak fry out at 9 Eagles. And one of the traditions back then, if you were dating somebody and you were looking at getting married, they would throw you in the lake. Mary and I decided we didn't want to be a part of that, and well, I guess I did. So we ended up walking back to the Illinois, which was 15 miles that night. On another occasion, we were over at 9 Eagles, and I had Mary in my arms on a boat dock, and she was eating a sandwich at the time, and somebody from Height decided I needed to go in the lake. And so instead of falling on Marion, I put her out in the water, and I ended up standing on the dock. I didn't want to fall on her.
Right.
When Marion graduated from Graceland, I thought our relationship was over because we were, like I said, on again, off again. That summer when I was at Augusta Grove for a reunion, Marion showed up to my surprise and decided that maybe we ought to get back together and that she was ready for marriage. While we were at reunion one afternoon, we were all sitting around Mom and Dad's cabin, And my brother-in-law, Jack Mann, decided to question Marion about her family, what they did, and what kind of things where they went to church, and what she intended in her life. And as he was asking all these questions, he finally turned to Dad and said, "Is there anything else you need to know, Dad, about Marion?" My dad was totally flabbergasted. He was so embarrassed. That fall, I returned to Council Bluffs, got a room in the YMCA, and got a job at another packing plant. I did many different jobs that summer. I worked at an insulation factory. I just was hard holding a job that summer. We saw each other at Graceland homecoming, then at Thanksgiving time. During that Thanksgiving break, I had planned a romantic dinner for Marion, and I was going to propose to her and give her a diamond ring. Yeah, but one of her friends from grad school came with her, and so it never seemed to be appropriate. So as we got to this wedding in Woodbine, her friend got out to go inside, and I asked Marion for a minute and gave her diamond ring before we went into this wedding. We were married on New Year's Eve and moved to Terre Haute, Indiana. Jobs were scarce there in Terre Haute at the time. I ended up getting a job at a tulip factory. So we had raised tulips from plant to bulbs, and we had them at different stages of their life. And there was always a lot of tulips that were thrown out that hadn't bloomed yet. And I would bring flowers home to her, and she loved the big, beautiful tulips. I also had a job at Burger King that summer. I bought 2 white shirts and a couple pairs of black slacks for the job, thinking that I'd need them. And the first day on work, the supervisor from Indianapolis came down and decided that we had too many employees. So that was the only day I worked at Burger King.
Oh.
But then I did actually manage to return some of the other shirt and pants that I hadn't wore. But I went from there to working at a gas station on an evening shift. Money was tight. Church service there in Terre Haute, Indiana were very interesting. We had a very small group. Joe and Vern Montgomery were there at the time. Joe wrote The Quiet Miracle, if any of you read that book. But church services, like I said, were very interesting. We read hymns. You haven't really attended a church service until you went through the whole service reading hymns. It was very strange. I went back to school and got my certification in elementary education and health and physical education, and graduated in December. Huh? Oh. Well, Marion, during that year out in Terre Haute, Marion got asked to come back to be a head resident at Graceland. And then I went back to Graceland, and I finished my education and got my elementary and physical education degree. A couple of summers I worked for the city of Lamoni as the recreational director. I organized summer softball and baseball leagues. I ended up officiating or helping officiate 325 games a summer. We had a lot of teams that played competitive softball, men's and women's. I also organized a program for children where we would do archery, we did golf classes, tennis classes, a number of activities. I also organized square dancing that we did up on North Linden Street in the evenings. When Marion was there at Graceland, our oldest son David was born. I remember him always having fun going out into the Tess Morgan Lounge and getting autographs from the young ladies out there. And they enjoyed taking him up to their room and stuff. So Marion remembers that at Gunsolly, but anyway, Marion and I also worked Upward Bound during those years, and that would be for underprivileged youth that had a chance to make Graceland. So one year, she was working Patroness Hall and I was working Gunsolly, and David would decide who he wanted to go to depending on how the day's activities are going. After finishing my degree, I ended my first year. I taught in Arispe, Iowa, and then would go on up to East Union High School and assisted coaching football and wrestling. I had to be on my toes as a 6th grade teacher because one of my students had read the encyclopedia from A to Z and probably had 90% recall. In 6th grade, he was taking calculus. So I would send him down to the principal who could teach him calculus because I would have been lost. I had to be careful in class because if I wasn't correct, he would correct me. He was a very sharp student and he was teaching his younger brother who was in 4th grade what he was learning. So it presented a number of problems to several of us teachers. Teaching school only lasted 1 year for me. They decided to combine classes and they cut back on teachers. Their deciding principle was you got 5 points for every year you taught, and you got 1 point for every course credit you had while getting your degree. So needless to say, all the new teachers moved on. I was one of those. They even kept some of the teachers who didn't even have a degree because they had all these years of experience. Then I found a job. I worked in the Commons. I worked security on campus for a while. Then I found a job with the Lamona Police Department. I worked there several years, but I couldn't always agree with some of the decisions that were made. I'm not mentioning any of the names, but one of the situations, a gentleman was going to drive his vehicle through Ford Motor Company because he was upset. His father and him were arguing. Father was trying to stop him from doing that. While 2 other senior officers to me were sitting in the utilities waiting for something to happen so they could make the arrest. I couldn't handle that situation, so I went over and broke up the thing, ended up getting hit in the head. But I stopped the thing. We did an emergency committal and took care of the situation in a more appropriate manner, I thought. After working in Lamoni for several years, they decided to go to a county-wide law enforcement system where they provided services for the whole county. And I had left policing at that time and got hired as a head resident of Gunsolly, Grable Halls. I volunteered time with a football team as well. I also was asked to sponsor a ice hockey club during those years. I never ice skated. Well, I did ice skate in my life, but it was dangerous to watch me. One time we were ice skating on the Mississippi River, and for me to keep my balance, my arms were swinging and everything, and my folks were laughing, and they were nearly falling down watching the comedy of me trying to ice skate. But I enjoyed working with the ice hockey club, and we'd go up to the Des Moines ice rink, and they'd kind of tell me when I needed to change different lines, and so I'd yell it out, and they'd jump over. During the time of living in Gunsolly, Grable Annex, our daughter Kim was born. So David was born in Tessmorgan, Kim was born in Gunsolly. And I served as a head resident from '76 to 1980. When Marion became coordinator of housing, I decided that maybe it was time for me to go on. I didn't want kids to have dealing with my situations with them and having Marion be the arbitrator of it. So I decided to move on. Chip Yates at that time, Newell Yates' son, was working countywide law enforcement and said there was an opening and asked if I'd be interested. interested in, and I applied for the position and got it. When I went to work there, I was still working, being supervised by a chief deputy at the time, and we were called to a situation where an individual was shot out northwest of town. And as it worked out, I was asked to transport the one individual to jail. And the sheriff stayed and dealt with the crime scene. But on the way to the sheriff's office, this individual was kind of pouring out what had happened. But one of the things the chief deputy had taught me was to always make sure I had advised them of their Miranda rights before when somebody was arrested. So I had made that. So when the case went to trial, they didn't allow the chief deputy to testify because he hadn't advised the subject of his right, but I had. That was a big learning experience for me. We ended up dealing with the situation well, but I learned very quickly that I needed to remember to advise people of their rights in different situations. While working with the sheriff's office, I had to go to the academy for a 12-week training course. Mary's going to pass a picture of my class. Much to my surprise, 2 of my roommates had applied for the class president position. And one of my friends decided I ought to be in that group. I ended up being asked to be the class president, which wasn't a big deal because you got to lead people through the taser incidents, be the first one to be tasered. I got to be the first one to get maced and all these different things. So it wasn't always what it was cracked up to be. While I was working at going through the academy, Ben Yerington happened to be the vice president of the academy that year, during that time. And that was always helpful to me too. I appreciated his counsel. I served in the countywide law enforcement center headquarters in Leon, Iowa, and we served 9 towns, including Lamoni, Leon, Davis City, Grand River, Van Garden Grove, Decatur, and Pleasanton. So we would, on a given shift, we would have 4 police cars working. We'd have a Lamoni car, Leon car, an East County car, a West County car, and so the county cars that were working the east and west would float wherever the calls came in as backup. Often we'd put on 250 miles a night just floating. I worked as a deputy sheriff for 6 years and then got promoted to be the chief deputy for the next 5 years. With the change of sheriffs, I was asked to become the investigator because he had somebody else saying he wanted to be the chief deputy. I also was acting sheriff for 4 months when one of the sheriffs left office and they needed to fill in, so they asked me to do that. During this time, I was also going to Davis City, part of the Davis City congregation. I was ordained a priest and later an elder while I was working at Davis City. I also later on was asked to be the presiding elder there for several years. Our youngest child, Chris, was born when I left Graceland and we moved to West 3rd Street, and so she was born in our house there on West 3rd. When David became a high school, we decided that he wanted to be with more of his friends, and so we came to Lamoni to go to church. During 30 years in law enforcement. I became a first responder. Um, Attended schooling such as drug addiction, critical incident stress debriefing, sex crimes investigation, domestic violence, fire and arson, clandestine drug alarms, law enforcement intelligent networking, hazmat operations, occult activities, storm chaser, a lot of different classes. And I was lucky to have a sheriff who, when I was working, always encouraged us to further our education in activities so that we knew better how to deal with those situations. And I tried to pass that on to the people that worked under me. I remember once working in law enforcement, I was involved in a number of task force operations. One I remembered was a jewelry heist that happened in Des Moines, and the suspects were fleeing south on Interstate 35. And I happened to be traveling up Interstate 35 at that time and spotted the vehicle and ended up in a chase with them. They got off at Decatur and headed towards Leon, so I thought things were going well. Going down Palestine Hill, going towards Leon, they decided to pass somebody but didn't see the oncoming traffic and ended up rolling their vehicle as they went down this hill, and diamonds flew out over this pasture. I actually apprehended one of the individuals while the other one slipped away into a cornfield. Later that night, I got called to back up. They had spotted the other individual in Wayne County in a bean field. And so we circled this and had life support. I had a helicopter up above with infrared that was telling us if we were seeing whether they were seeing deer or a human being. We actually came up upon him and got within 10 feet of him before he actually surrendered.
Wow.
He was still laying down on the ground in the middle of bean rows, hoping not to be seen. And luckily the drug dogs that we had with us came up upon him and we captured him. And I worked a number of meth lab cases. One of them began with a routine stop, and then as I got the subject out of the vehicle, a bottle of his meth rolled out by his feet. So he got arrested for possession of narcotics. And doing a follow-up investigation, I learned where his lab was. As we were serving a search warrant on that resident, we announced ourselves and entered, and it startled the guy that was in the house who was sleeping in a chair with a shotgun across his leg. And so, luckily, nobody got hurt, and we dismantled the lab. That case involved 7 different agencies. It was always interesting when I was working the sheriff's office because so many things went into all the counties around about us. Another meth lab operation was in a timber. You can imagine trying to sneak down on a meth lab in a timber. And they had a house built down there with tree limbs stacked up like a teepee. Not knowing they were there or not, when we actually got to the lab, they had left earlier that morning. So we ended up destroying that lab and dismantling it, and later found out that this individual or this group had been involved in a murder investigation down in Harrison County. Once I was working in Lamoni, I was still countywide sheriff's office, but my tour that month was working in Lamoni, and I was making an OWI stop on Main Street. And I was there where Radio Shack used to be and had the individual stopped, and he had been swerving down the road, and I knew that he was impaired. And as I asked him to step out of the vehicle, he decided he didn't want to get out of the vehicle. and he started to drive off, and he had his window down, so I reached in and had a hold of the steering wheel, and he drove me down towards Varsity Drug before I was able to turn the steering wheel into the curb, and he didn't want to run into the building. Life was always a challenge. You never knew what to expect. I want to say that so many of my experiences, I felt I was able to do a lot of ministry to many people during the years that I worked in law enforcement. In domestic abuse situations, child abuse investigations. I got to know a lot of people very well. And one of my things was always to treat people with respect. I always felt like human behavior was kind of reciprocal, and when it wasn't, you knew it very quickly. Mary and I kind of worked in different circles. She worked on campus, and I knew most of the people out in the county and in the city of Lamoni. We didn't share a lot of information a lot of times because it wasn't feasible to do that, or I didn't feel comfortable doing that, and she didn't also. Oftentimes we'd get a call in the night, and if they were swearing, I knew they must not be wanting to talk to me. They must have been married. I didn't stand for that. I also say threats were made against my life and also against my family at different times. One of my interesting experiences while working in Lamoni, Orville Hiles was the mayor, and he was doing a promotion with the state of Iowa, and Iowa, you make me smile. And Orville introduced him to me, and I was asked to say that phrase, and of course I did, and then I gave him my big smile, which wasn't much of a smile. My kids still enjoy that film every time they see it. As countywide kind of wound down at one point, and Lamoni and Leon didn't think they were getting the man hours they should get. So they went back and started their own departments again. During this time, I was hired to be the police chief in Lamoni, which I served for the last 16 years in law enforcement. I also threw my hat in the race for sheriff once. I got defeated by 100 votes, and later on I learned that basically Lamoni didn't want to lose me as the police chief. Lamoni department consisted of 3 full-time officers. While I was there, I organized a reserve unit with booster numbers, 6 more officers. I introduced a drug dog to the city of Lamoni, which was very helpful in a lot of meth situations, drugs and marijuana situations. The dog was a dual-purpose dog. Jim Corvetti was the owner of that dog, and it was dual trained in marijuana detection, and also it picked up on gunpowder, which was very helpful to us in many occasions. One of the most difficult situations while working Lamoni was responding to a bank robbery. I was called, and as I went to take my position in the alley between half a block east of Banco West, I was flagged down by Casey Jeans and said the vehicle just went west on Main Street. And Casey said, I can identify the vehicle for you. He ended up getting into the vehicle and went with me, and he was also part of the reserve thing at that time. As we headed west, going by the high school, I noticed that they weren't going up the hill on West Main, so I knew that they had turned south on Highway 69. By the time we got to the state line, we had them in sights. And as they entered the interstate, I again thought everything was going well. They're going to run it into a roadblock, because I had asked dispatch, and it was on mutual aid, asking for Harrison County State Patrol and the Missouri State, or Harrison County sheriff's office and the highway patrol to set up a roadblock down the way, which probably would have happened south of Eagleville. As I was going south on Interstate 35, I decided that it would be helpful to have the plate information of the vehicle, so I got a little closer. Made them suspects nervous. The driver came out and started shooting back at my vehicle. I took evasive action to get away, so they had to shoot across their vehicle to get at me, which made it impossible for them. But at that point, the passenger came out with a rifle and started shooting back at my vehicle. One of the shells struck my windshield. I felt something go through my right eye. I knew that I was in dire straits as I looked in the mirror. I wasn't sure what life held for me. So I told my dispatchers what was happening, that we had shots being fired and that I was hit by something, and broke off chase at that point. I didn't want to go to Harrison County Hospital, so I had Casey drive me back towards Decatur County Hospital and met the ambulance by the Iowa rest stop. They transported me up to Decatur County Hospital, and Dr. East was there. After examining me, he decided that I needed to go on to Des Moines. They wanted to life by me, but knew that that was not a good situation for my eye. So I ended up going in ambulance to Methodist in Des Moines. They decided that if it was them, they would go to Iowa City. While I was in Des Moines, Dan Kitty Martin administered to me before I took off to Iowa City. When I got over to Iowa City, Chuck White and Dick Otis ministered to me over there. The morning I was supposed to go into surgery, I went into AFib, so they couldn't do the operation until they got my heart settled down. Once they got that done, they removed my eye, and in this little white container, if anybody wants to see, there's an artificial eye. So you can see what it looks like.
Dale, what year was that?
That was
1999.
1999. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, I lost track where I was at. After they got my heart back into rhythm, actually they were going to shock it back into rhythm, but I went back into the rhythm the next morning. The press was circling the hospital during that time, and the hospital kept them away from me. When I returned to Lamoni, the press was still following Mary and I. They were circling the house. I finally told Marion to let him in. Let's get it over with. Be done with it. Marion made several threats that she didn't want anything personal about her home or what was it?
People, no people.
She didn't want any people. Anyway, I ended up having to go to trial in Louisiana for both of these boys who were involved in the robbery. I'm not going to mention any names. That was a tough experience. I had to rehash and live those experiences over again. It was a long time before I enjoyed going down Highway 69 where I got shot. I could always see that spot and remember what. But while I was there, it was also difficult because I met the wife of the husband of her husband who had been shot and killed by these boys prior to robbing the Lamoni Bank. They test drove a vehicle and he ended up getting shot and tossed over a bridge. So I got to know her misery and her story, and she knew some of mine. It was also difficult because one of the boys had grown up in Lamoni and his mother had been the youth minister. She actually called and offered her condolences to Marion prior to learning that her son was involved in that situation. So I had to deal with that aspect also. So after having done 2 trips down to Louisiana, both of those trials. I ended up coming back to Lamoni. I was told I could still work law enforcement as long as I qualified on the range. And one of the officers that I worked with at the sheriff's office had took me out on a drug situation that I had been working prior to that. And I decided maybe I could. I did counseling for several months to make sure that I was thinking clearly, that I was dealing with life and not holding grudges or harboring ill will. Actually ended up working 10 more years with the Lamoni Police Department. I think my time is winding down, and I'm gonna skip ahead on some here. I actually learned to shoot better left-handed than right-handed, which was amazing to me. Also, while working in Lamoni, I got to teach policing in America for a couple of years at Graceland. During that time, I also had several students who did internships with the Lamoni Police Department. One of them went on to work with State Patrol. One went on to work with the Division of Criminal Investigation. One became a state fire marshal. One ended up working for the FBI. So I felt like I had good experiences in teaching. I enjoyed it. I remember having a number of those students come back while I was teaching and kind of share their story. I remember having Shane and Deb Skinner come back. Shane was working out in New Mexico at the time. Deb was also working out there. She was a forensic artist. So there was a lot of interesting things that I was able to bring to that class that I enjoyed. One of my hobbies was, I also should say that why I was shot, after I had got shot, one of my lifesavers was my oldest daughter's daughter, who I carried and pushed around in the stroller all around Lamoni. She brought relief and comfort, helped me take my mind off of things. Also, one of my hobbies was drawing floor plans. When Marion's folks decided they needed to move out to be close to us, I helped draw a floor plan that the Hosey family built for us, for them. I also ended up drawing floor plans for the home that Marion and I now live in, making sure that it was wheelchair accessible, hallways, doorways, and things of that nature, that we could do everything that we wanted to do upstairs. We didn't have to go downstairs. We also planned to bring Marion's mother out to live in our basement at that time, but she passed away the weekend that we moved in. I had so much support after my incidences at the sheriff's office. We received letters from all over the world. The law enforcement community was a big support. The church was a big support. After I retired, I decided that I had to have something to do. I ended up mowing the Rose Hill Cemetery and the bike trails for several years, along with my 4-acre yard at home. We now have 7 grandchildren who I love and we love to watch grow up. We never missed ball games with our children growing up, and we have tried to follow our grandchildren at the same. I'm going to end my story is my life has been full. And I truly believe that I'm only here because of the grace of God, like many of you, as you share your stories. And I'm going to end that unless there's any questions. I put a display of all the different badges that I had up here on the table. Any We also, Mary and I, after she retired, went on many vacations. We also went to Mission, Texas several years because I had a sister living down there. My brother and his wife would go down, so four of us siblings would share time in Mission, Texas. They had a beautiful working shop down there. I ended up building grandmother clocks. I made one for myself and two of my oldest children. I've got one left to make, so I've got to make another trip sometime. If there's any questions about anything that I've shared with you, you're free to ask.
Dale, I got a question.
Okay?
You and I are probably the only two people in here who have pulled a gun on somebody.
Yes?
What are your feelings about that?
I never had to fire my gun at anybody. Even in that bank robbery chase, I never fired a gun. I tried to keep the people around me aware. I had gun pulled at times, but I never was in a situation where I actually had to use it, where it was life or death to me or them. Probably the closest was the chase, but driving 95 miles down the interstate, you don't shoot. Anybody else?
Always said I wouldn't have a gun in the house. Yeah.
I actually sold all my guns after I retired. I got rid of all the handguns. I did keep a couple shotguns around in case we had a varmint or something that we need to get rid of. But other than that, I closed that book and went on. Lester.
What years did your family go to Liverpool in England?
What year did they leave?
What year? Yeah.
I want to say 1853.
Okay.
Oh,
I've always tried to wonder how people who go into law enforcement get over the fear that it could be a bad day. In other words, I could never decide to be a cop because I'm a scaredy cat. What was it about you every day that, and maybe you grew from day one and a fear level until a couple of years doing the job? Did it get easier overcoming the fear that maybe it would be a terrible day for you?
well, I often started my tour with prayer. And I trusted in the Lord. Like I said, I always felt human behavior was reciprocal. And for most of my experience, it has been. I also felt that there was an opportunity to give. I believe in people, and that people change their lives. Some of the people that I have dealt with have become friends of mine. And I see them and they can speak to me and we can have a normal conversation. I just feel I was blessed throughout my thing. And like I said, in child abuse investigations, dealing with children and their parents, domestic violence, counseling, I thought there was always a lot of opportunities to also minister. And I don't know, I never worried about that. It was a job it done. I always thought a better term for police officers, sheriff's deputies, were peace officers. And that's the way I treated the position.
I have to say I wasn't always that okay with him being out. He worked nights, worked 8 at night until 4 in the morning. And if he was not home shortly after 4, I would be wide awake worrying about him. So probably I worried a whole lot more than he did. But I finally decided, because I was working, I had small children to take care of, I'm like, I cannot do this. So I'm just going to have to trust in God that everything will be okay, and that if something goes wrong, they will call me, which they didn't, but beside the point.
But Marion, follow up, after the incident where he was shot, was there the conversation in your home where you said, honey, I don't want you to do this anymore?
No.
Okay.
One of the things, I did a sheet once, things I liked about my job. Always something different. You had to be a problem solver. You had to use a lot of discretion. Advancement opportunities. Help with people. Allows the opportunity to work with all kinds of officers and departments. Things that I disliked about my job. Paperwork, lots of overtime. Many weeks I worked 60 to 70 hours. Boredom at times, plea bargains. Things I looked for in hiring people, people with good communication skills, good listeners, good common sense, problem solvers, person not afraid to ask questions, person who is able to make decisions, person who's thorough in his investigation, a person who strives to improve their skills and educating themselves to become the best they can be.
I'm passing that picture of Al Gore. You didn't mention that.
Yeah. I also got to work when Al Gore spoke at commencement one year. I got to work with the Secret Service and seeing how they set up the perimeters and how they were going to leave if a situation arose. Very interesting things. A lot of beautiful experiences. But teamwork was the most important. And being able to internet your intelligence with the neighboring counties and stuff so that we work together and not as individually parties.
I have to share this because it was very eye-opening to me. I went with him one time to a tractor pull, and he was in uniform, and it was up here at the fairgrounds. And Chief, hi Chief, hello Chief, hi Chief. I said to Dale, I said, who are these people? And he said to me, and these are the people you never see. They're the people of Lamoni. And you and your ivory towers see none of them. It was true. I did not know the people who were my neighbors. But Dale did. He knew them.
Lori?
No, I just have, talking with Graceland students, it seems like there's increasingly more than going into law enforcement. And maybe that's because there's a Graceland program for it. I don't know if it's any more than ever before, but I've wondered if there are more that are going into law enforcement because of the world conditions and, I don't know.
Well, I can turn that off.
I remember one time in one of the meth raids, I traced stuff back to stuff being sold out of the science hall. Stolen out of the science hall, one of the employees. Well, I always had surprises. I couldn't believe it. Our time is up.
And a lot of people used to talk about, joking about it being like Mayberry. Andy Griffiths, I said, oh, you don't know. You don't know.
Hey,
Bill?
remember sometime, I think in the 80s, you were doing something in Creston, and you had I believe, a kidney stone attack, and ended up somebody driving you all the way to the Leon Hospital.
Yeah, yes.
Thank you.
I had 9 of those kidney stones, and I actually found out that what was causing them was I had a parathyroid gland that was out of whack. And once they removed that, I never had another one.
Thank you, Dale.
I got another question.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
One more. So we watch movies and we watch TV shows, and we see this depiction in some episodes of stone cold killers, evil people. I feel like if I asked you, did you ever meet an individual that you said to yourself, they're lost, they are so evil, we can't help them?
I'm not sure I can say that. I know that boys that were involved in my shooting, one of the films they watched was Born Killers. I chose never to watch that film. And it just, I didn't want to think of that aspect. I just trusted that the Lord would watch over me in most of the things I did. And for that, I think He did.